I'm going to call to order the special meeting of March 30th, 2021 of the Planning and Zoning Board. I'd like to ask everybody to join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and for all.
Justice for all.
Thank you. So I'd like to do a roll call to see who we have. I know we have a quorum. So let's see, starting with the commission chambers from the west to the east, could you let me know who is present?
Jacqueline Scott.
Jay Schechtman.
Bill Rotella.
Mike Weymouth.
Thank you all. And John
Barranco.
Mary. Okay, Coleman.
Pruitt's here.
Let's see. Any other board members I'm not seeing on the screen? I'm Catherine Moss. I'm the chair.
Is Brad Cohen here?
Brad, are you here? I hear his child.
Well, that's my cat. I'm sorry.
Bridget, that's hilarious.
That is my cat.
Okay, well, I'm sure Brad and Mary will join us at some point and we'll get their appearances at that time. But we do have a quorum. Bridget, do you agree with me? You're nodding yes? Okay, you're muted.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right. Well, we only have one item tonight. It is UDP T21002. The applicant is the city of Fort Lauderdale. This is not quasi judicial, so I am not going to ask for disclosures. I am going to ask if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this item. If so, I'm requesting that you stand and be sworn in by either Shari Wallen or Dwayne Spence or Bridget Chiappetta. Would you do so at this time? Shari, do you want to do the honors?
Yes. If you're going to speak to the board tonight, please raise your right hand. City moderator, can you unmute the speakers? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please answer.
Yes.
Yes, Fred Stressall.
Yes, Pat Roth.
The other request I have is that our designated staff person tonight, if you could introduce the staff presenting tonight.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. Tonight from staff, we have Assistant City Attorney Dwayne Spence, Shari Wallen. From Public Works, we have Nancy Gassman. We will also have Raj Verma, Public Works Director. We have Glenn Hadwin and Kimberly Pearson, who will be doing the presenting tonight, and Carlan Grant and Trisha Logan, and Trisha will be coordinating the public speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ella Parker is the manager, I'm going to get it wrong, Ella, manager of the Sustainable Development Department.
Close, Urban Design and Planning, which is part of the Sustainable Development Department. And my apologies for not introducing myself. Yes, thank you. Ella Parker, Urban Design and Planning Manager.
Glad to have you with us. All right, so we are up to the item. If we could have the presenter take the podium.
Good evening. I'm Glenn Hadwin, the Sustainability Manager, the City of Fort Lauderdale Public Works Department. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here today for this important meeting. I'm pleased to be here with some key members of the team that's worked on it. Some of them you've already mentioned. Kimberly Pearson is our Sustainability Coordinator and was the technical lead. Raj Verma, our Public Works Director, should be here shortly. And I believe Mark Williams is on the Zoom. He's our Urban Forester and is available if there are any questions for him. Tonight, we will be presenting on the city's proposed amendment to the Urban Development Regulations, ULDR, Section 4721, Landscape and Tree Preservation Regulations. This effort began more than a year ago when the City Commission expressed concerns for the preservation of specimen old growth trees and strengthening tree protection during development in the city's code. In addition, in 2018, an internal working group was formed of city staff who have a role in helping to maintain and manage the city's urban forests to address conflicts in code language. Since the last major revision of Section 4721 in February 2015, the Department of Sustainable Development has been noting concerns and developing recommended changes to improve and strengthen this section. Because of these concerns, the City Commission has directed staff to review the city's code and to address urban forestry concerns in a comprehensive way, with the goal of having a more streamlined and consistent application of our regulations while strengthening tree preservation as a whole. These efforts are aligned with the city's strategic goals and plans. The city's Press Play Fort Lauderdale 2024 strategic plan emphasizes cross-departmental collaborations, and this particular effort is supported under both the infrastructure and public places focus areas with the respective objectives, including growing and enhancing the urban forest and improving water quality in our natural environment. Likewise, the recently adopted Advanced Fort Lauderdale 2040 Comprehensive Plan has policies and goals which are intended to promote growth of our urban forests, Florida-friendly landscaping, tree species diversity, in the presence of environmentally sensitive lands, and formulating recommendations for development approval, as just a few examples. Over the past year and a half, the city has held dozens of meetings and presentations and provided opportunities for input across a broad spectrum of stakeholder groups. We have a slide up there, which is probably very difficult to read, but we just wanted to highlight the diversity of the groups and the number of meetings we have held. As a result of that input, there have been many changes to the proposed language. The city has considered all stakeholder feedback and have formulated what staff believes to be defensible and reasonable language consistent with the scope and goals of the revisions. The goal was to propose updated ordinance language which can be consistently applied, interpreted, represented, and enforced, and which is intended to balance the input of all stakeholders in a fair and equitable manner. You'll be hearing from several stakeholder groups this evening, some that support the language and some that may have issues with the language in part or in whole. We're not here to defend the proposal, but rather we ask for policy direction from you as the recommending body to move forward for ultimate commission approval. The following presentation will provide an overview of the proposed amendments based on the goals set forth by the direction of commission. With that, we will proceed to the first section. Section 4721.1 is the intent and purpose. The language was amended here to clarify intent and purpose, adding language specific to tree and palm preservation and protection, strengthening existing language to minimize tree and palm removals, and enhancing language to maximize sustainable landscaping practices. The next section is 4721.2 definitions. There were a significant number of changes, updating, simplifying, and adding definitions. One example is we added a definition of arborist report, a simple definition where the more extensive requirements of the report as it applies in the regulations is defined later in the requirements sections of the code. Section 4721.3, general provisions. This section had minor amendments to clarify the existing language to promote natural drainage and the use of pervious surfaces, and added exemptions, such as related to the recent state statutes 163.045, which preempted municipal regulation of pruning, trimming, removal, replanting on residential property in some circumstances. There were no changes in section 4721.4, landscaping required. In section 4721.5, permit required, there was a slight amendment to the title to clarify that the permit is required for landscaping activities. Section 4721.6, landscape plan required. This section also contains significant amendments to update, simplify, and add language. A new packet will be required to act as an information hub for any and all site activities proposed within tree protection zones. This language is meant to simplify plan review, permit issuance, pre and post construction activity, compliance inspections, and permit closure. Section 4721.7, soils. There was a minimal update to include a requirement for soil analysis, looking at pH, soil, texture, soluble salt levels, percolation, and organics to determine any need for enhancement or improvement on the soil to align with planting. Section 4721.8, appropriate plant selection, location, and arrangement. This includes supportive language for referring to the city's design and construction manual. Additionally, language was added to exempt dry detention ponds when planted with bahia grass from the high water use calculation. Section 4721.9, installation. In this section, language was updated to appropriately size sidewalk cutouts to minimize damage to sidewalks as the tree trunk and root flare grow in diameter. Likewise, the language was added for soil volume to support healthy trees in the urban forest. Section 4721.10, irrigation, is not proposed for amendment. As you may recall, this was recently updated in the 2015 Florida Friendly Landscaping Initiative. Section 4721.11, maintenance. This section was updated to clarify maintenance responsibilities for trees, palms, landscaping, and irrigation on private property, public property, and right-of-way areas. Section 4721.12, landscape requirements for vehicular use areas. This section currently contains large run-on paragraphs, and the amendment proposes to break up text and illustrate in lists to help simplify understanding of the requirements of the section. Section 4721.13, landscape requirements for zoning districts. Much like the BUA section, this section currently contains large run-on paragraphs, and the amendment proposes to simplify and improve understanding by breaking up the text and using lists instead of the previous text. Additionally, the language was strengthened to increase species diversity and canopy trees. Language was changed to require soil volume options for street trees, and language was added to include reference to landscape buffer requirements. Section 4721.14, landscape for special districts. Minimal amendments were made to this section to stay in compliance with the commission assignment of authority for this district. Language is provided to replace tree grades with flexible surround. Text was repeated for sidewalk cutout requirements and soil volume language, and language was added regarding the buffer yard requirements. As with other sections, this section currently contains large run-on paragraphs, and the amendment proposes to simplify these by breaking them up into lists. Section 4721.15, tree preservation. This section probably had the largest number of amendments, beginning with a new title and a reordering of the sections based on priority, with tree protection being first. Tree and palm protection section includes protective barricade specifications and outline of activities allowed within the drip line. Continues with root cutting requirements when it is necessary in the landscape. Tree and palm relocation requirements were amended to include preparation, permit, bond, irrigation, follow-up inspections. Tree and palm pruning requirements subsection includes specific prescriptive language for intentional pruning. Tree permit requirements, that subsection was amended to list specific actions, criteria, and documentation. Tree and palm mitigation requirements were updated to reflect a standard inflation increase. Tree abuse subsection was clarified to outline all prohibited actions, and a new subsection was added for enforcement penalties for not obtaining a tree permit. Section 47-2116, removal of trees and dead trees constituting a public nuisance. This section was amended by retitling to clarify the purpose of the section. The new title is removal of public nuisance trees and palms. Section 41-2117, street tree planting, is proposed to outline the application for an arboristry project and add language outlining the components of an urban forestry tree and palm inventory, as well as an urban forestry master plan. Section 47-21.18, and the last but not least, prohibited landscaping. Language was added to update to include a reference to the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Chapter 5B 57, Florida Administrative Code, in the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council Invasive Plant Species List. That concludes our summary of the amendments to ULDR 4721. We're available for questions at this time or later in the meeting.
Okay, terrific. I would like to note that Vice Chair Mary Fertig joined the meeting at the beginning of Glenn's presentation. Do we have any other, Brad, did you join? Okay. Shall we go to the public hearing? Because I do not see any hands, and I'm looking at Commission Chambers. Why don't we just get take care of the public hearing first? Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Good evening, Chair. This is Trisha Logan, Urban Design and Planning. Online, we have Jeremy Chansey, who is in the attendee list. He can be unmuted.
Good
Jeremy?
evening. Thank you. Thank you for hearing me. My name is Jeremy Chansey. My home is at 2500 Southwest 21st Street, Fort Lauderdale. I am a resident from birth. I am currently the president of the American Society of Consulting Arborists. This is a North American association that spans both Canada and the United States. We basically are experts for experts. I am the past president of the Riverland Preservation Society, and I am speaking today specifically on 47-21.15, the tree preservation portion of the code and the modifications. I support this portion of the code. The reason why I support this is I found that the technical literature that has been cited within the new code is in line with our national standards. It is necessary to keep a level playing field, and that is excellent. I would bring to the attention our commission that it's very important about the definition of specimen tree within our city. We have a very unique definition of a specimen tree, which is uncommon in the rest of South Florida. We define a specimen tree not only by its size, but also by its health condition. I would encourage the board to not include the health condition, since a health condition of a tree is utilized in how we formulate the value of the tree when doing our mitigation costs. And therefore, we basically exclude, I would say, the vast majority of our mature trees within our city. And if you recognize that a tree to become a specimen, which today's code says 18 inches and it's being recommended to be 13 inches today, that 18 inches, once I find trees of that size, it is very hard to find that tree in what we define as good condition, which today it's 70%. In the proposed code, it's 61%. However, that is subjective. And what I keep finding is professionals will go out there and be 1 percentage point below the threshold, whereas all of our other neighboring municipalities and counties do not use that, with exception of Broward County. They utilize the size specific as defining a specimen. And I encourage us to recognize that there are no trees that reach size and maturity, that do not have defects because they're old and we have a very severe weather climates, and we're all going to find defects. And so defining that good specimen size tree is going to be rare, and we're going to be removing trees at a very low cost and really giving away trees. And that's really what's happening in our city, is that the cost to remove these specimen trees is extremely low in South Florida, and probably the lowest of all the municipalities that I work in. And I would encourage that the board make sure that that language is looked at thoroughly, and also that we do have lists that already define our categories, and the categories of our trees, our category A, B, C, these are our species categories. These species lists, I believe, should be utilized as they have been utilized for decades, utilized to also define what is considered a specimen size, so that trees are not lost, whether they're smaller than the specimen size, or trees that actually, when they're 18 inches, are far larger and become more onerous for us. For example, ficus species like a Ficus aurea, we may consider that to be a larger than a 13-inch or 18-inch tree because of the size and the speed at which they grow. So I encourage that the documentation that the city already has and been utilizing is expanded upon and utilized for the preservation, and that's the key word here. This is a tree preservation portion of our code, the preservation of our canopy. And I will challenge anyone to walk through some of our older neighborhoods like Cooley Hammock and Rio Vista and Victoria Park. It will be very hard to find a mature tree that is considered a specimen based on the way we define it today. And that's key to protecting our canopy. So I encourage you all to please delve in that and continue to utilize your experts who live within your city.
Mr. Chansey, I have a quick question. What is the change you recommend to the proposed revision of the ordinance?
I would strike the good condition or condition percentage necessary and just make the size be indicative of what a specimen is and define those sizes based on species.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Chansey?
I'd like to make a comment.
Jackie?
I really agree with what he's saying, because, you know, living in Coley Hammock, where we have trees that are probably 100-year-olds or greater, it's becoming extremely easy for anyone to come in a residential property and remove them. And so if, you know, we need to take that health condition out of the code. I've heard people say that it takes 100 years for an oak tree to mature and grow, and then another 100 years for them to die, because they're such strong trees. So I think that's very good input, Jeremy. Thank you for your comments.
I agree with you, Jackie.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is Dwayne Spence with the City Attorney's Office. One of the goals in drafting this ordinance was trying to come into compliance with Broward County, which has a municipal certification program for their tree preservation ordinance. Mr. Chansey, if I may, through the chair, are you familiar with that program? And does Broward County ordinance contain that 60% or greater requirement in their ordinance?
Yes, I'm familiar with their ordinance, chapter 26, if I'm not mistaken. It does include the specification that they define as a specimen tree as 18 inches and 60%. However, where difference in the new code, which you're now allowing for the professionals to come in and actually appraise and dollar values new tree, that percentage is calculated as a depreciation when we go about doing.
Chansey, you're cutting up on us. If you could backtrack like 3 sentences. I don't think we got it all.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So Broward County ordinance does include 60% health condition as defining a good tree. The difference is Broward County, the staff calculates the appraised value of the trees. We, in this new ordinance, are allowing for the appraisals to be performed by professionals like myself. In those professional appraisals, we actually utilize that same health condition percentage, and it becomes a depreciation for the value of the tree. The difference that's happening here, and I believe this is the intent of Broward County, is that, you know, not all trees are considered specimens. However, if you hold this line of, you continue this health condition percentage, what you'll continue to find is that people will go beneath that number so that the tree never qualifies as a specimen, and therefore they will pay much less dollar value for that tree and be more apt to remove it rather than try to preserve it or relocate it or make an amends. This is a way to preserve our canopy moving forward.
And that's, I guess that's where I'm confused, because I thought your comment was to complain about the definition of specimen tree, whereas our ordinance is substantially similar to the Broward County ordinance for certification purposes. And so you've kind of stated that it's not the definition, but how the ordinance applies, and that's not in the definition section. But then towards the end of your description, you went back to the 60% and complained about that, which is, again, I know our ordinance says 61, but Broward County requires 61, the 60%. So if we're trying to get certification, which was the directive, I don't understand what changing our definition to be incompatible with Broward County, how that accomplishes that.
Mr. Spence, I work in both Palm Beach and Dade County and across the country. And let me encourage you that Broward County doesn't always have it right. And I'm going to encourage you that that is not right. Across this country, they don't define things by percentage. They define things by a size, and then they let the professionals go and defend that when they go forward, when they bring it to the Planning and Zoning Board or to the commission or to the powers that be. So I would encourage you not to be stuck to an ordinance that is at least 30 years old with Broward County. That chapter 26 has not been updated. And I would expect that if they did, they would reconsider that 60%.
No, I just wanted to be clear on that. So if the board is to follow your recommendation, just to be clear that the Fort Lauderdale code would not be certified by Broward County. I just wanted to make the record clear on that.
I have a question.
I have a question.
Okay, we have multiple questions, but Mary's hand was up first. Mary, your mic is off.
Okay, from here on, I'm coming to the meetings. I just want everyone to know, between the technology and the mic. I was actually going to comment on what Mr. Chansey just commented on. And I noted reading through this that many times the rationale was we were coming in compliance with Broward County. And there I know are other measures besides Broward County, but if I'm understanding you on page 15, number 73, the definition of specimen tree, where they have as a condition rating of 61% or higher, you would remove those words. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay. And do you have any feelings on the size, on the minimum sizes of the specimen tree?
Yes, I feel like the single 13 inches across the board would be too small for all of the trees. I believe we should be defining them more by species and utilizing our species list we already have published for our tree list, and utilize that and define those sizes on that list, so that the list is constantly evolving, since that list is a Lauderdale publication.
Mr. Chansey, you cut up on us there. Could you briefly restate that?
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
The list, I would say that our sizes should be defined, because a specimen small native lignum vitae would need to be 8 inches to capture a specimen size lignum vitae. A specimen size live oak may be 18 inches. A specimen size Ficus aurea may be 30 inches because of the growth habitat of each one of these trees. We have at our disposal a species list that's produced by the state of Florida chapter of ISA, as well as the city uses a category list that identifies the desirable species within the city. I would utilize this list as defining which trees are specimen size per tree, not a blanket. I believe the blanket of 13 would be onerous for all of us to go out and do the type of reporting that's going to be required, it would be onerous for the developer and property owner for the number of trees that I'd have to make a photographic report and submit as a specimen tree report.
Mary, you're on mute.
Are there sizes that you would, is there a way to quantify this? And I have a suggestion of large trees at 18-inch DBH, medium trees at 13-inch, small trees at 8-inch. Is that a measure that can be used?
You could use that. I would prefer that we talk to your staff as well, because they do the permitting and would recognize what is more appropriate as far as what's going through the process. I'd say that's not a bad system. I think you'll catch all the specimens at that point. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. There's a hand raised in chambers.
Yeah,
You can go first, Jay.
this is Jay Schechtman. A question for City Attorney Dwayne Spence. If we decide that Broward County's requirement is just not adequate, and we would prefer the city of Fort Lauderdale to have a more strict requirement, thereby rendering it not certified by the county, as you suggested, is there any repercussion to that?
Right. So the odd thing is the certification program allows the municipal ordinance to be the only authority within the municipality, and Broward County would relinquish its authority to enforce its tree preservation ordinance within the city. If we are not certified by Broward County will continue to enforce their ordinance within the city's jurisdiction, and the city will enforce our ordinance in the city. So you'll have dual tree preservation ordinances active in the city of Fort Lauderdale. If we get our ordinance certified by Broward County, then the city of Fort Lauderdale's ordinance would be the only tree preservation ordinance operating within the municipal boundaries. That's the effect.
And what's the issue with that?
No, that's neither here nor there. I just want you to be aware. It's the having two regulating entities dealing with tree preservations within the city versus one.
Would that necessitate additional reviews?
Yes, it would.
So every application would have to be reviewed both by the city
It would
and
be
the county.
It would be at the discretion of the county if they wanted to impose permitting, tree permitting and tree removal permitting and so forth.
And sorry, last question. And one change, one more onerous restriction such as this one would undoubtedly deem us as not certified by the county?
Well, ultimately, the county makes the decision as to whether to certify our regulations. I was just pointing out that the definition that we use is substantially similar to that used by the county, which pretty much ensures certification. Changing that definition, I guess the discretion would be with county staff to determine whether or not the removal of that 61% puts us out of compliance with their ordinance.
Thank you.
I have a question, Dwayne.
Whoa. I have multiple hands up, and it is now Jackie Scott's turn.
Thank you, Chair. Dwayne, I mean, it seems to me the county, I'd like to know, and maybe staff can answer this, with the number of trees that have recently been removed in Coley-Hammock, big specimen oaks, how many times was the county involved in making that decision other than city staff?
Zero.
That question is to who, Jackie?
To staff. I mean, we're talking
Okay.
here about wanting to be in sync with the county.
Glenn, are you able to answer that question? It's a little technical.
That's okay. This is Kim Pearson. We are in the Public Works Department. My understanding of how permitting works in the Sustainable Development Department is permits are reviewed and processed by city staff at the Fort Lauderdale level for public and private properties within the city. The only time the county is brought in if they are properties under the jurisdiction of the county for purposes of permitting,
And what property would be under the jurisdiction of the county?
like a school board or a retention area or a water treatment plant, something like that, that would be under the jurisdiction of the county.
That answers my question. That really is my point. I don't personally think that we have to necessarily be in sync with what the county's ruling is, since they.
So I don't want you to confuse the issue. As I stated, so our current ordinance is certified by Broward County. So as I stated, and if the county does not certify our changes, they would have the right to enforce their tree preservation on all properties within the city. So
Okay,
it's two different.
so it's a
It's
little gamble.
apples
is
and
what you're
oranges.
saying.
A lot of work for them.
It's probably a little gamble, and I can't imagine why the county would really get into wanting to do that. My next,
We agree that would be bad, don't we? If the county were to have control over all areas of tree preservation in Fort Lauderdale?
Yeah, if they actually did that.
yeah, like here's the
I
thing.
don't want to
Look-
take that gamble.
Look at the city of
Anyway,
Plantation. The city of Plantation, I'm going to bet that their ordinance does not agree with the county ordinance. I know that's a city that is really into tree preservation. I just think that we have done, as a city, a really poor job of protecting trees as it relates to single-family residences. It's very-
so this ordinance is going to go to the city commission, correct?
Yeah, I'm just making a point is all.
Right, why?
Right, no, I was asking Dwayne. Dwayne, is the ultimate decision up to the city commission?
Yes, it is.
So between now and then, we could pull the plantation ordinance and see exactly how they differ from the county.
Yeah.
Jackie, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I have some other comments. I'd like, well, you're in the middle of public input, so I'll make my comments later. I don't want to keep
Oh,
the public from
I
speaking.
forgot I was in the middle of public comment. Mr. Chansey, I see your hand is up, but you made your presentation, and I'm going to ask if there are any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item, because I believe there are.
Yes, Chair. The next person who signed up to speak is Thomas Chansey. He's listed as an attendee. If he could be unmuted.
Mr. Chansey? Thomas Chansey?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm in agreement with my son and what he had to say. I'm a landscape architect, a tree preservationist, and a certified arborist. In fact, the interesting part, I'd like to say, first of all, I didn't really notice it for many years, but my name is L. Thomas Chansey. That's LTC, but that's exactly my three different positions that I do. But I'm in total agreement. The thing that I've noticed the most that we have worked on over the many, many years over preserving historic items in Broward County and all over the state and other places is that these issues are critically important. That you don't need someone to come in and take a quick look because they see a bruised arm and say, well, this person needs to be put to sleep in death so that they can not suffer a bad foot or a bad hand. So the point is very true. What Jeremy said, and I don't need to go on about it, over the things that I have been involved similarly with for many years, and that we were up against were things like this, the necessity of preserving the beautiful trees that I was been involved with, thousands of them here in this city in the area. But my point is, and those are the issues that come up very frequently. They find one little scar somewhere and they just assume that because of that can't make it. But we've got people that live to 100 years old and they got a couple scars on their shoulders or something else, and that doesn't kill them. So I won't bore you with a continuation of the things that we've done over the trees in historic years, but I'm just telling you that those are the important things in Fort Lauderdale, working with Mrs. Bartlett at the Bonnet House and working at the Bryan home, the baobab trees, and the Stranahan, saving the Stranahan live oak. I have the thrill of saving Annie Beck's historic tree right downtown, and the performing arts, saving that tree and getting to change that, and saving the rain tree, saving 1,600 trees in the Sailboat Point. I could go on and on where it's been important. I have my tree saving at here at Softscapes at 95 in Broward. It's my jungle, as it were. And the purpose is the more that we can do that way, the more water that's drank by the trees, and we don't have to worry about the flooding of mow, and we can breathe better. And I won't bore you with a lot of things, but what Jeremy said, we're up for that, and it's not a big deal to make that change and show that we're ahead of schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Chansey. Do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, our next speaker is Carol Tambury, and she is listed as an attendee. If she could be unmuted. We'll just take a moment.
Carol? Carol, can you hear us? Hello, Carol.
She can unmute herself now.
Carol, unmute yourself.
Unmuted. Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. Good evening. This is Carol Tambury. I'm a resident of the city of Fort Lauderdale, more specifically in Coley-Hammock. And I would like to voice my support for proposed amendments to this ordinance, and a few points that just briefly I'd like to bring up as just as an environmentalist, conservationist, and preservationist. I definitely agree with the existing code requiring the 50% native species installed following the Florida Florida-friendly landscaping principles. And I also feel it's important, the language for the requirement for the soil volume to be provided under paved surfaces. I think that does reduce surface damage and it increases canopy spread. I also feel that it can help filter stormwater, and also with the expanded canopy spread, I think that can offset the urban heat island effect. And another point I'd like to bring up is the creation of enforcement and penalty language for trees removed without permits. I believe that should definitely hold both the property owner and the contractor responsible. So overall, after reading these 95 pages, I do think these amendments are overdue, and I think they will bring the city of Fort Lauderdale better into 2021.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, Chair, we have our next speaker is John Harris, and he is on the attendee list. If he could be unmuted. He can unmute himself.
Yes.
Are you there, Mr. Harris?
Yes, you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So my name is John Harris. I'm with Earth Advisors. I don't live exactly in Fort Lauderdale, but I have been highly involved in the review of and the revisions for this landscape and tree ordinance with the city of Fort Lauderdale. I am one of the members of what is generally called the Landscape Architects Advisory Group that has put in extensive hours and providing both written comments as well as review meetings with staff over the course of the last 9 months. I'm not here to try and speak into the record all of those comments or all that we've written and provided, but just to highlight some of the main points from my position and my profession as a consulting arborist and also, urban forester. Just to give a short qualifications for where my comments come from and the expertise of my comments.
Mr.
I
Harris,
do
I
have
just want you to let you know that you have 3 minutes, okay?
Well, and that's kind of what I thought. Okay, so related, I am a registered consulting arborist, certified arborist, tree risk assessment qualified, and I am the only landscape economist by title in the country. I do a lot of expert work, as well as I do training for the Florida Association of Code Enforcement, Florida DOT, Landscape Inspectors Association, and many cities in both the interpretation of landscape codes and the enforcement of landscape codes. So a few of my main points to bring up, and Jeremy and others have talked about the specimen tree. I believe that there is a need for an evaluation and a minimum health condition, but more so looking at adding a tree risk assessment following the tree risk assessment method from the International Society of Arboriculture to be included as part of the required evaluation for specimen trees, so that we are qualifying these specimen trees as worth preserving because they are adding value and not increasing risk for properties. I think that that's important. And the minimum health percentage is one of the simple ways that that's been incorporated in many codes, including Broward County. Secondly, with the specimen trees, I think that the city could do greatly in coming current with the specimen tree specifications and preservation to follow a species, the categories A, B, C, or large, medium, small maturing species, as are in the recommended tree list, because that will place protection onto different species of trees for those that actually are mature or over mature, truly considered specimens of those species types, and give greater consideration to those remaining on properties. The other main point is regarding the high recommendation and inclusion of structural soil and minimum soil volumes for planting sites. We really need to consider that a volume of soil or cubic feet that can be calculated by engineers with greater depths versus greater areas, widths and lengths, doesn't really work in our environment with high water tables, and doesn't really work when the research that we as professionals know that the root systems really are in the top 18 inches of soil. So we really should be, in making any of these soil volume requirements, having a maximum depth to be calculated, and really looking towards increasing the green space, the open green space, where large canopy trees are planned to be planted, as well as those that are being preserved, so that we are allowing for the root growth and width that will support the canopy growth and width. It's important in the goals of the city for the tree canopy percentages, but also really and greatly being presented by the public shareholder groups, the desire to see more of the large canopy trees that are on existing properties that have yet to be developed or overdeveloped as the redevelopment really comes through, especially residential neighborhoods, to try and incentivize keeping these large diameter specimen trees. Although I will say the only way I see that truly happening in an economic decision environment is by reducing the maximum developable square feet of building on these lots in different categories or zoning districts, so that there is the ability to keep those trees without the argument that it's taking away, X square feet at $100, $200, or $1,000 a square foot of the buildable area that is in the developer or the property owner's rights to develop. So I think there's more work that needs to be done on that. The last comment from me is that we do need to go through the definitions one more time, both with staff as well as those of us that are providing input. There are still some conflicting terminology being used, and I do see the need to get more consistent with the listed industry references, especially the Florida Grades and Standards and the American National Standards Institute A300, maintenance of trees and woody plants. So that's what I wanted to put into the record as my main points. And I do thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this important movement in the tree and landscape preservation for the city of Fort Lauderdale.
So the public wishing to speak on this item?
Can I ask Mr. Harris a question, Catherine?
Sure. Jackie?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see, as it relates to an arborist or landscape architect coming to a property and looking at a tree and saying, and I'm talking residential now because that's the easiest target to remove trees, I think, in the city. So you have a landscape architect or someone to come out and they say, yes, this tree should be removed because it's sick. It's not going to last long. It's dangerous, whatever there is. Should there be testing involved that is more than just their opinion? Should they have to back their opinion up with testing versus just have an oak tree removed based on what they think?
Or Jackie, what about the city's own paid arborist going out and confirming those results?
Well, that's possible, but those results can't be results without a test. It's not like you're going to go to a doctor and he's going to say, yep, you have appendicitis, I think. Is he going to do any tests? Yeah. I mean, it's the plastic
Can I
change. It's
can I
about,
speak to that?
Mr. Harris, you have 1 minute.
yeah.
Okay, so the requirement in an arborist report to provide photographs as well as to provide descriptions as to what those photographs illustrate is about being able to identify the visual signs of defects or damages or deficiencies in the trees. In my practice, the visual evidence is very apparent. The desire or the opportunity to do further internal testing really isn't necessary in probably 90% of the tree evaluations that are done, because it's really the visual evidence of a whole leader that actually is dying back and bark is falling off of it, or the included bark that's at the base of a tree and the trunk that actually is starting to crack between those, or the lack of those visible defects and deficiencies, whereby then the arborist for the city or other people reviewing it, like a landscape architect, can look at that arborist report, look at the photos, and make the conclusions that the arborist is false. Thank you.
Can you determine how much longer a tree is going to survive? And I'm talking specifically about oaks, because I understand they spend many years dying.
So the difference between surviving, as in parts of a tree staying alive, versus the tree being viable and or at least structurally a what I want to say, a moderate or low risk as opposed to a high risk, is again the use of terms and or the misuse of terms, especially by professionals that I read a lot. So really, when you talk about how long an oak tree survives, the oak tree could take 20 to 50 years to be losing one leader after the next and still be, quote, surviving. But it may actually be, you know, a very high risk for the property as it's coming apart and parts of it are falling. And there isn't any maintenance other than cutting those parts off before they're, you know, dead and dry and fall off. That can really be done. You can't put that back, and you can't take that dead wood and make it alive again.
So Jackie, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And Catherine, I also had my hand up.
Yes, Mary.
Mr. Harris, have you met with staff and some of the public meetings?
I have, as well as our advisory group has had some meetings with staff to more extensively go through the comments that I and the landscape architects I'm working with.
Okay, and you had mentioned the percentage. We had a conversation on this, the minimum health percentage, which I think in here was under the specimen tree definition. Do you agree with this as is written, or would you substitute a greater, more lengthy definition for that?
Well, my first comment is that it is consistent with
Keeping
the
in mind,
county
Mr.
code.
Harris, you've got 1 minute.
Yes, yeah, I thank you for reminding me. So the 60% health condition is similar to what other cities as well as Broward County has. The misuse of that percentage by many professionals to, quote, prove that a tree doesn't meet specimen status, as opposed to the use of it as a minimum percentage, happens greatly. And I really push for staff to do a better job of doing their own analysis and writing a report refuting those Arbus reports that are abusing the health percentages as a reason not to count a tree as a specimen. And that's part of the reason that I do the training that I do for cities and cities and other agencies, so that their staff can make a better report and make a better standing against these highly paid professionals.
Anything else, Mary?
No, I didn't. I'm glad he mentioned that he does training. That was good to know. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Harris? Chambers? Chambers, your hand is up.
Hey.
All right, so Tricia, do we have another member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, the next person signed up to speak is Patricia Roth. She is listed as an attendee, if she could be unmuted.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Roth, Fort Lauderdale resident in the Isles area. I actually just had a question. Of what I could review, it appears that most of the language is aimed at preserving what we have, which I think is already a huge challenge, especially, if an arborist can come in and say the tree is diseased and bingo, it's gone. But my question was more, I guess, a clarification I would ask you. Is there also language that specifically talks about increasing the tree canopy? I know today we're focused on preserving what we have, but is there also language somewhere about increasing the tree canopy?
Good
or
question.
having a percentage of, a development must be a green space? Is there any kind of language like that? I looked, but I didn't see it, but I might have overlooked it.
Good question, Ms. Roth. Glenn, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, are you able to respond to Ms. Roth?
I will defer to Kim to answer that one.
Okay, who's speaking?
Hi there, this is Kim Pearson again. How are you?
Kim.
Yes, to answer that question, there are several points in the proposed amendments to increase tree canopy coverage for a new installation.
Thank you. Ms. Roth, does that answer your question?
Yeah, is there a specific section where I can read about that?
Yes, hang on one second. There's a few.
Thank you. Thank you.
Section 4721(3).
Uh-huh.
Section 4721(8).
Uh-huh.
4721(9).
Uh-huh.
4721(12).
Okay.
4721(17).
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, are there any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, the next person signed up to speak is Alex Fennick. And
how do you spell that last name?
It's Fenech.
Mr. Fennick, are you there?
I don't see him on the list. I'm not sure if he's in the chambers.
Okay. Is Mr. Fennick in the chambers?
No.
Okay.
All right. We'll move to our
Mr.
next.
Fennick appears later, we'll take care of him then.
All right. Our next speaker is Emily O'Mahony, and she is on the attendee list.
Ms. O'Mahony.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Good evening, Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Emily O'Mahony. That's how we say our last name. I'm a licensed landscape architect from Jupiter, Florida, partner in the firm of 2GHO. I did spend my earlier years in Fort Lauderdale for at least 12 of them. I'm part of that landscape architecture group looking at the code, and I've been brought on for more of the statewide look at things. I have served my professional association, ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects, in many different roles at the state and national level, and am currently honored to be one of 2 nominees for president of ASLA National. I have 40 years as a licensed landscape architect here in Florida. I am also LEED accredited for at least 15 years, and that stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And it's a standard, it's a rating system for buildings and communities. It is recognized globally in all 50 states, and it encourages environmentally and socially responsible, healthy, and prosperous environment that improves the quality of life. And CITES is another rating system. I bring this up because these rating systems are based on that are providing for sustainable and regenerative landscapes, have been developed through research and performance metrics, and we can all learn from it. These resources, all codes should reflect. Fort Lauderdale is not alone in patching the status quo. You have a big job here, but why not lead the way and modify the code to actually save the trees, increase the canopy, minimize utility and infrastructure conflicts, and do it effectively based upon research. And I would just say, John's mentioned it, others have mentioned, your code gives an option for making a larger tree planting area, a green space. Your code is pushing to do structural soil and other things under pavement, but that's not necessarily sustainable. And if you give a larger green space, you'll get a larger tree, more canopy, more heat island mitigation, which is all that climate action items. So it comes around when you start looking at the bigger picture. More trees are not necessarily the answer. The right tree in the right place is the answer. Prepare the site for the ultimate tree. It takes looking at the code differently, more through a performance lens. As we are in Florida, we have the unique opportunity to use palms, part of the branding and identification of our state. It seems that you are proposing to significantly limit the use of palms. As I said before, right tree and right palm in the right place. Do not negate the visual value of landscapes to the economic health of Fort Lauderdale by removing the use of designing with palms. And in conclusion, the design of the outdoors is not a matter of math. Creating inclusive and livable communities does not have a one-size-fits-all process. It is the expertise of professionals like landscape architects that understand the nature of plants and trees and the nature of humanity and how people use space. I strongly recommend that you have landscape architects review landscape architecture plans, that landscape architects be part of your staff. And minimally, you should have landscape architects rewriting this code. Fort Lauderdale has the opportunity now to make a big difference in the future of outdoor environments with modifications to this code as proposed by the licensed professionals currently being led by Doug Kuhlman and Fred Stressel, which you'll hear from later. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes. Our next speaker who signed up is Natalia Barranco, and I believe she is in the chambers.
Ms. Barranco?
If you could go to the podium.
Ms. Barranco, are you there?
I believe she's there and she's making her way to the podium.
Okay, thank you.
And yes, she is my
Okay.
sister.
Yeah, with more hair. Hi, Natalia Barranco, landscape architect, celebrating 11 years with my own business now, practicing 15 years. As I reviewed the landscape ordinance, just starting with the intent and purpose, if we just concentrate on that, then you read the document and then read that intent again and see if it met the intent. And I think it falls short. From the packet that P&Z received, we learned that we already increased our canopy 20%. So something's working, and I think the mitigation that we're doing is helping. It does fall short. I agree. I agree with everything Jeremy said for the most part. I agree with John Harris. We've spoken a lot. I think where we're missing is there's no incentive to keep a tree. If I'm going to get penalized X amount to remove a tree, that same site should be giving X amount credit for keeping that tree. So a tree takes up a lot of room, takes up a lot of resource on a site. So it should be negated from the site as far as coming up with the quantities that are required for a site. Other things in the code, just to give you the Cliff Notes version. Many things to this day, I still have to fight every day with reviewers when we're in conflict with SEPTED principles, FDOT principles, even our own city engineering. Let's fix the problem now, put it into code. We shouldn't conflict. We're rewriting it. When you're rewriting the tree ordinance, let's put that at the very beginning of our ordinance. It should be the first thing you read. Fort Lauderdale, we care about our trees. Shouldn't be tucked at the back of the code. Palms, Emily spoke fantastic. Palms, Google, anyone at home, Google Fort Lauderdale right now. What's the first thing you see? Is palms. It's part of our identity. It's our character. We're increasing on every site and every application. Right now, we have a 50% canopy requirement of all trees on site. We're boosting it to 75%. I don't have enough land to support this. So I think we have to look at FDOT for street tree, for guidance. There's reasons they have such restrictions. You go around town, try to make a turn and see palm trunks in the way that you can't see. We have to, it's all about designing safe places. Let me just look at my notes real quick. But I think the most important aspect that's missing from the tree preservation is we need incentive to keep trees. Even big developers with large stacks of money to develop like to save money. We got to make it fair for everyone to develop here.
Thank you.
Can I ask her a question, please?
Sure, Jackie.
So when a person removes a big oak tree, for example, maybe just hang there for a second, staff. So I want to remove a 100-year oak tree in my house and my property. I'm going to knock my house down and build a new spec house, and I'm going to get rid of that 100-year-old because the arborist or landscape architect said it's not healthy, it needs to come down. What do I have to do? What do I have to do in relationship to replacing it?
This is Kim Pearson here. The evaluations that are looked at by the Sustainable Development Department don't base a tree based on age.
They don't what?
They are not evaluating a tree based on age. They are
Okay.
evaluating a tree based on diameter, the trunk diameter, the location, the species, the health of it. And there are several factors that come into play. If the tree is a specimen, if it's a non-specimen.
Yeah, I think I understand that part. My question is, what do I have to replace that with?
It
What
depends.
happens? I pay a fee, I remove the tree, and what do I have to put on that site?
If the tree is a specimen tree, you'll be mitigating dollar value. Currently, you'll be mitigating dollar value. If the tree is a non-specimen tree, you will be mitigating for caliper inches.
That's not my question. Either that or I'm not understanding the answer. My
It was
question.
a question.
Excuse
But go
me?
ahead, Jackie.
My question is, if I take down a 40-foot oak tree that's 50 years old, what do I have to put back on that site? How much do I have to pay? And what do I have to put back on that site?
May I?
Yes, please.
So your site has your site requirement.
Oh,
Yeah,
wait, I'm sorry. We wanted to hear from Kim Pearson.
My understanding, and maybe it's wrong, the reason I'm asking this question, it's because we've lost a lot of oaks in my neighborhood. And I'm asking the question because my understanding is you have to put so many caliber of inches and you have to pay a fee. That's it.
Unless it's a specimen tree.
Right.
Then you pay.
So this brings me to the definition of specimen tree that Jeremy was talking about earlier is critical because it's much more cost effective for me to tear that tree down because of our definition than it is to put in a new tree. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. We have a lot of people to talk and a lot of board members wanting to talk, and we'll have our own time for personal comment at the end. Mary.
Ms. Barranco finish? She had a question.
Well,
I'd like to know what she had to say.
Just a comment from the other flip side of that coin. If you have this parcel of land and you want to knock it down for another home and build to what code allows you on your property, are you okay with the devalue of your property because there's a tree in the way? So there's always flip sides of the coin. So that's that balance that we have to do.
Thank you.
I had a question. My question was for Ms. Barranco. Are you, when you're referring to the 75%, 50% being changed to 75%, are you speaking on page 58 of 97 on 16B? Or is there not? I'm just looking for specific sections where you're addressing it.
I
In
know
that section, it says 75% now instead of 50% of the required street trees shall be shade trees. And the remaining 25% of the required street trees may be a combination.
it comes up in the VUA trees, move from 50%, because right now it's 25% need to be 3-inch, 25% need to be 2-inch. So that means 50% of our shade trees on a VUA is 50% for shade trees. It's bumping up to 75% for the VUA. It's bumping up to 75% for street trees. It's bumping up pretty much, I think, in every group that in buffers, it bumps up to 75% as well.
So what you're saying is wherever in this that it changes from 50 to 75%, you feel the 75% is excessive.
It's excessive because all of these areas abut each other. And if we look at the planting area, I don't have enough area to fit all these trees.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Tricia, who is our next member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Our next speaker is Doug Kuhlman, and he is in the chambers. If he could go to the podium to speak.
Mr. Kuhlman?
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Fort Lauderdale Planning and Zoning Board. Excuse me. Based on our limited time, all right? Based on our limited time to present this evening, I first want to thank all of you who had the time to review our letters of March 9th and March 28th from the advisory group, initially referred to as the ad hoc committee, and my individual email comments on March 28th. Secondly, I want to personally thank those who had time to meet personally with Fred and I to discuss this important revision, the ULDR Section 4721 Landscape and Tree Preservation Ordinance. One only has to ask, after review of the first 7 of the 96 definitions, is this ordinance ready to move forward to the City Commission? Not to mention sections 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, and 17. Our advisory group has devoted nearly 9 months to try to improve the ordinance. Yes, we have made some progress, but related to the technical aspects of these revisions, With the possible exception of section 4721.15 tree preservation, the balance of the ordinance as before you tonight is not ready nor complete. If the proposer tonight was from the private sector, you would send them back to be reviewed and revised with their neighbors and address the issues brought up here tonight and throughout the public input process. The stakeholders are the neighbors of this submittal. Therefore, the only reasonable avenue to proceed is to request this ordinance be sent back to staff to continue with their efforts and with professional assistance from outside the city. And incomplete and incorporate all reasonable requests by the stakeholders, especially the landscape professionals that have to deal with the technical aspects of the code on a daily basis. Note, the rewrite of this code was first attempted in 2014 and again in 2017, both times abandoned. You do not have an easy job tonight, but an important one. I want to thank you for your time and service, and I think I have a minute left. I want to comment about the Chansey father and son team that I've had the pleasure of working with in my 50+ years here as a registered landscape architect. You heard Jeremy say, size by species. That's what we did when we tried to rewrite the definition of specimen. It was changed from 18 initially to 10. We got the staff to come back to 13. We contend, based on the already existing documentation in the city, a specimen tree needs, large trees, 18 inches. A medium tree is the 13 they're recommending. We actually changed ours to 10 and took it down to 8. As Jeremy said, every tree grows differently. One tree size does not fit all species. This gives exactly what you need and the arborists really want, and that is to have trees that they can go out and make specimens. One size does not fit all. We sent to you, how much time do I have left, by the way? Keep going. As I said, and I think it's important, Section 15 tree preservation is what 98% of the residential homeowners talked about in all of the public input. I read every email that came in. That's what they want. That section is pretty good. There's 3 or 4 little things that I don't think technically are proper, but we can move ahead with it. The one thing that's in that section, I think the city would like to see, they've increased the fines or the value of trees by 150%. I don't see a lot of people objecting to that. In fact, we support that. So that section is the only one of the 18 that really, and the last thing I'd like to say, on 1 out of every 3.5 pages of this document, they use the term as determined by the department. That is no way to write a code. No way to write a code. The staff does not have sufficient expertise to take this challenge and perform it. They need assistant help, and that's what needs to happen. The rest of this code, except for 15, needs to go back, be worked on and brought back to you for final approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Mary, do you have a question for him?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Mr. Coleman, do you have any qualifications on to speak tonight?
Do I have any what?
Qualifications. What are your qualifications?
Oh, I didn't want to take my 3 minutes to do that.
All right, well, you can do it now.
I've been a resident here since 1968. I've spent 42 years with a firm called EDSA that I think you're familiar with. And I'm semi-retired for the last 10 years. Projects that I've personally been involved with are Beach, Riverwalk, BPT Center, Marriott Harbor Beach, and all over the world for that matter. And a lot of people have asked me, why am I even doing this? Well, as a landscape architect, we have an obligation to our own society and to our own community. We have a responsibility. To be registered, we have an obligation to the health, safety, and welfare of the public on everything we do. So I'm here tonight because of my responsibility to my profession, my responsibility to my community. And fortunately, I have enough time to take a look at this because it's unfortunate that we have COVID. It's unfortunate we can't wait and have discussions because these Zoom meetings are very difficult to have feedback and build consensus. This does not have consensus. I think the presentation is wonderfully filled with flowers and wonderful things. But that's why I had to send you memorandums from the group and myself, because everything has been presented here by staff is not necessarily apples to apples. I don't
Mr.
know
Coleman, I think,
if you
Mr.
would
Coleman,
like to see my
Mr. Coleman,
if
Mr.
you'd like
Coleman.
me, yes.
I think Mary may have a question for you.
Okay, well, one last thing. I will be glad to leave you my 12-page resume for the record. Thank you.
That would be very nice if you would do that. And so my question is, when you were saying you do not feel this is ready to go to the city commission at this time, and you have suggested a number of changes, that's in your professional opinion based on your qualifications as a landscape architect?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, who is our next member of the public wishing to speak on this
Madam
item?
Chair, I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Who's that?
Mike
Who's-
Lehman.
Okay, Mike?
Mr. Coolman, when we met, something that I haven't heard talked about, but was alarming to me is the Tree Canopy Trust Fund. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And before you do, how did this trust fund start and when?
Well, we might have to ask Fred that
Okay.
because he probably can answer that. But I can tell you that the Tree Canopy Trust Fund, by the way, the ordinance that you're looking at tonight is what we refer to as the third draft. The first draft for the Tree Canopy Trust Fund had proposed 2 new uses for trust fund monies. They proposed it for 2 studies for I'll get hit shortly.
The question was about the Tree Canopy Trust Fund?
Yes, that's where I'm getting to. But I think we have to distinguish between the first draft, the second draft, and the third draft, because we had input to try to change those. And in every case, what's before you tonight is not acceptable, in my opinion, not only to the professionals, but I think a lot of the residents of this community do not want to see money taken from the trust fund and used for other things than just planting trees. They want to create an urban forestry tree and palm inventory and an urban forest master plan. Those sound wonderful. The first proposal was to take 20% of the cost of those studies, or a total of 40% of the annual balance of the trust fund each year, to pay for the studies and pay for the updates. The first thing that came to mind, and I think even the county brought this up, how can you take 40% of something you don't know what it's going to cost? So we suggested that instead of taking 40% of the cost of 2 studies that are unknown, we would suggest that they be allowed to take 10% additional from the trust fund on an annual basis for those studies, as long as that 10% was less than or equal to 40% of the studies. And what that means is, if the studies are $500,000 and you're going to take 40%, that's 200,000. They get 90 from the trust fund. They get the 110 from their general funds, which is where all the money should have come from.
Could I just stop you for a second there? Mike, is this addressing your question?
Oh, I think he's getting there.
Mr. Coolman, we have a lot of people to speak tonight.
Well, I'm just trying to answer the question, and I think
the question was
spent
the
9
issues with the
months.
Tree Canopy Trust Fund.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, I'm going to give you another minute, Mr. Coolman. You've had more time. You've had more than twice the amount of time. I know it's a very important subject, so use your 60 seconds wisely.
The second version came back, and what they did with our suggestion of 10%, they took the 20% that was in the old code, added the 10 to it, said we'll use 30% of the code, and they can use it for Part A, Part B, or Part C. So in theory, they've now garnered 30% of the code, for basically anything but planting trees, which is, again, not the way to go. We have provided you all and staff with our total analysis of this. So the Tree Canopy Trust Fund is probably the biggest change in this code, and it's probably one of the most sensitive issues because they're taking money not to plant trees, they're taking for other things that ought to go out of the general funds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coolman. John?
Yep, I've got a question for Doug. Doug, are you aware of any of the history of the fund and its use? It's kind of a related question, but in the past, how has the city used funds, let's say, to replace specimen trees or to create more canopy in the city? Are you aware of that? Is that something you could answer?
Well, the only thing I'm aware of is I've heard a lot of complaints where the city has used the money to buy trees, but they're not buying any trees of any size. They've taken out trees on public lands and parking lots, and they put back toothpicks. They wouldn't even meet the code. And that's, I think, a shame. In fact, there's in the city memo that was in your packet from the city manager, it said in there that we're trying to find ways to spend the money. Well, that's not a very fiscal sound way. Just go out and let's spend the money because it's there. They need to spend the money on what it was intended to, which is plant more larger trees, increase the canopy. And I think you heard someone else say the canopy's already gone up 20% and we're shooting to go 30. Well, I don't know how they made those statements. In fact, it was Ms. Pearson in the 2019 minutes of the meeting, but there must have been a way to figure out how the canopy went up. So why do we need to spend money on a survey? I don't understand that. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you.
Brett might be better to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Coolman. Any other questions for Mr. Coolman? I hear none. Our next member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, our next speaker and the last person who signed up is Fred Stressow, and he is in the chambers. If he could make his way to the podium.
Good evening, board members, staff, and specifically Bridget Chiapetta, who I haven't seen in almost 10 years. Before I get started on my 3 minutes, I would like to ask the question of the chair that we were addressing the county's certification of the city of Fort Lauderdale's code. And the discussion led to the fact that if we were to change the code to something other than what the county required, my question to Dwayne Spence is, if the city of Fort Lauderdale's code is more restrictive than the county code, how can they not certify the city ordinance?
Okay, so Mr. Stressow.
That's specifically to Dwayne.
Mr. Stressow, you know how these meetings run. Dwayne, do you care to weigh in on that, or should we proceed with Mr. Stressow's comments?
Just briefly, their review is certified that the ordinance meets or surpasses their code, but we wouldn't be in the position to say whether or not they would certify us or not.
I can't
Thank you, Dwayne. Mr. Stressow, please begin.
Okay. You asked for professional qualifications, and I wanted to start with the fact that I've been residents in the city of Fort Lauderdale since 1946. I joined my parents' landscape architectural firm in 1966 and have practiced for over 55 years. Oddly enough, I hold the oldest registration number in the state at 259. I've served on the Planning and Zoning Board for 24 years, on the Board of Adjustment for 12 years, and a similar amount of time on the Utility Advisory, and the Infrastructure Task Force. I have participated in every landscape ordinance rewrite since 1986. And I think that as far as qualifications, the best example of my firm's work is the 300-page compendium of landscape design for the Dade County Rapid Transit System. I thought this afternoon that I'd like to deal with housekeeping. What I would like to say is housekeeping. And I wanted to look at the combination of people that are listed by the staff as part of stakeholders groups. And I was surprised tonight that that our meeting is not overrun by homeowners who want to save trees. There's nobody here. There's nobody online to talk about that. 50% of the group that is listed of the 31 shareholders or stakeholders are city staff, county staff, and state staff. So I'm not sure when we're terrified to talk about change in the code and the staff tells us that they can't accept our recommendations unless they went back to the stakeholders. I'm not sure who the stakeholders really are. I want to move on. I said that Emily has given us some fairly lofty ideals about what landscape architects actually do. John talks about the legal and liability issues. And what I wanted to do was to drop down to the level of the dirt, which is a part of the code that I have to deal with in the design studio. I was focusing specifically on the requirements for all zoning categories, which is the vehicular use areas on page 43, the net lot area on page 53, and the street tree planting on page 58. I went back to compare both codes for the vehicular use area. And I think that there is a 50% increase in the number of shade trees that are required in the vehicular use area. The code requires shade trees to be placed in all peninsula and landscape islands. Absolutely requires. That compromises overhead clearance. And I said that unknown in what was presented by the staff is that landscape areas for large specimen or for large trees requires a certain amount of root soil in terms of 1,200 cubic feet or 43 yards of structural soil, and that soil costs today in place at about $160 a yard, which means that for every tree that doesn't meet the area requirement, it's going to cost the developer more than $6,000 per tree to plant in the parking lot unless we increase the parking lot islands. The current code says it takes the shade tree placement and it gives the tree placement priority over the lighting system. And where I come from, the lighting engineers get really first cut at trying to decide where the poles go on the basis of a photometric chart, and we try to work the trees around them. The code today doesn't allow you to do that. I looked next at the net lot area on page 53. The difference between the two codes of today and what is proposed is that the number of shade trees in the new code or in the draft is 3 times the number of trees that are required under the old code. We did studies that would show that it is questionable that 3 times the number of trees can even be placed on a site. That's based on the fact that they're planted 30 feet on center across the entire site and there's no open space. I went back to what Doug spoke to in the ordinance, where it says the department director may revise the shade tree requirements provided herein if it is found that the parcel is unable to meet the planting requirements. As a landscape architect submitting a plan to the planning department for permit, it is difficult to tell my guys that are doing the design work that I can't tell them what's acceptable and what's not, that they have to go to the planning department and have it reviewed. And that costs additional time, additional money to the developer. And I just don't think that's fair. I mean, if you
Mr. Stress out, do you think you could wrap up in the next 2 minutes? I gave you double your time.
Sure. The staff made a comment. They said, when we raised the issue of what we were trying to present and what we actually wanted in the code, they said we can't do that because we'd have to go back to the stakeholders and get their agreement, which is why I started with the stakeholders, that 50% of the stakeholders are city, county, and state employees. Street tree requirements. This to me is the most important thing. And there's a 50% increase in the number of required street trees. I tended it to say one size fits all. And I said, the ratio that they have that is in the code is 1 tree for every 40 feet or part thereof. So if you have a 50-foot lot and you have a 20-foot driveway and a 5 or 10-foot setback, you've only got 15 or 20 feet between the edge of the driveway and the adjacent property line. How can you put 2 street trees in that 18 to 20 feet? We picked Gumbo Limbo, for instance, is on the list. And I said, and Doug, I think agrees with me, that the Gumbo Limbo is the most aggressive root system that we've got. And the staff's response was, we cannot remove that tree from the list because it is the responsibility of another party. That's absurd. I think that I actually asked the staff to put a picture up. Is that you? Yeah, the one that you met. I picked a group of Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you loaded that. Ah. I picked these 2 photographs. They're not very good, but it says one size fits all, and said, does taste really matter? And I would submit that when the code requires the bulk of the trees to be shade trees on a streetscape, that those people that live on the Isle of Palms, had they been developing today, could not do what is actually what the city of Fort Lauderdale looks like and all the tourist oriented information. So I don't agree with most of the areas that they have increased the size and quantity of shade trees. And I don't know how anybody can get through that other than to do, as Doug said, to do a workshop or hire a landscape architectural firm to begin to try to sort through all this. I think it's interesting that the city of Fort Lauderdale right now does not have a landscape architect on staff. The only landscape architect that was on staff is at the Parks Department, and he retired 2 months ago. And I think it's just dreadful.
Mr. Stressow, I've given you 3 times your time. So thank you very much. Okay. Mary, do you have a question?
I have a lot of questions, and I don't know. I'm concerned that we've got a lot of expertise sitting in the audience, and I don't really know that we typically have that much, but I know we need to go ahead with the committee, the board comments and staff comments. I just would like to know if we have the ability, if they're sticking around, to ask them some questions on these, because you've got a lot of experts in the audience.
I'm sure we do, Mary. I'm sure we do. So
if we have a question later, I could ask Fred or Mr. Stressow or Mr. Kuhlman or somebody.
are you talking about right now or when an issue
Well,
comes?
I think it makes more sense to go ahead and start going through the sections of this, but if we get some contradictory, I think
So
it's.
are you asking me to close the public hearing and bring it back to the board?
Can we
Well,
then ask
let me
questions?
ask, let me ask, Tricia, do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
No, we do not have anyone else that has signed up to speak.
Okay, the public hearing is closed. Do we have, is there anyone wishing to discuss the ordinance?
Yes. I have do you want us to start? How do you want to do this?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I have a multitude of concerns, and I'm just going to really start with, and I don't know how you wanted to do this tonight, Catherine, if we want to make amendments tonight or wait until this comes before us, or whether this is an interim presentation. But I'm going to start.
Wait, Mary, it is before us. Am I mistaken?
Okay, so that's
good on this tonight.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my camera. Boy, I can't wait to get back into that, to the city hall. Okay, I have lots of questions on this, and I'm going to start with the first question, which is, it looks like this was an internal committee that brought this forward. Is that correct?
Who's your question to?
My question is
Glenn?
to whoever
who?
on staff is best to answer.
Glenn or Kim?
All right, Glenn Hadwin speaking. Matt, before I answer that, I wanted to make a note. Our director, Raj Verma, has joined, and he asked if he could have a few minutes to address the board.
We will take that into consideration.
Okay.
Can you answer Mary's question?
Yes, we had an internal team of staff that was working on it. We had an internal working group, but we also had many public meetings. We had an email from from June 20, late June 2020. We released the document for public comment. We had it available until October 22nd. We had many dozens of meetings, or probably a dozen meetings for the public throughout that period. We also had an email address. We had a website. So we took input through all those meetings.
Okay, so in November of 2019, the city commission heard about your, let me ask you another question. Did you have any consultants working with you on this?
No, we did not.
And do you have a landscape architect on staff?
The city did, as Mr. Stresso mentioned, he has retired.
And was he involved in working on this?
No, he was not.
Okay, so when you redid this section, you didn't really have anybody who was a landscape architect or had expertise in that area?
Not on staff.
Okay, and you didn't have an outside person. Okay, so, and I was looking through your meetings. I know I was there in November of 2019 when this was presented to the city commission at a conference meeting, and it was following the cutting of some trees in the Riverside neighborhood near Stranahan High School. And so there was a lot of concern about tree preservation, but there was also expressed at that meeting concern about the fact that it was an all internal group as opposed to having any community voices on it. We've heard from a lot of people tonight with a lot of expertise, and I guess this isn't really a question for you because it's not within your purview, but I'm just wondering why the city maybe didn't make use of some of that expertise on this committee. And there's so much I want to talk about. I'm not going to go to my other concerns about process, but I do have many concerns about the process of rewriting this section, which seems to have gone on now for 2 to 3 years and has been largely an internal process. So I will, Catherine, when you're ready to entertain them, I have a number of motions to amend certain sections of the definitions. And I don't know if you want me to do that now or you want me to wait.
No, I want to finish the board discussion, Mary.
Okay, then I'll hold that.
I have motion to approve.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes. Are you finished, Mary?
No, I have a long list of things, so I'll.
Well, but are they amendments to the ordinance or is it discussion?
it's discussion on various things. I want to know why the staff recommended changing from 50% to 75%, what that was based on, and if that's feasible to plant that many trees in a section, for example, in a parking lot, and have those trees grow to maturity and have the tree canopy that we're looking for.
All right, Mary. So I'm sorry. I thought you were moving on to making amendments to the ordinance. If you still have discussion, let's do it now. So the question Mary just stated, Glenn or Kim, can you speak to that?
Can you please share the code section you're speaking about?
Well, okay, I have a couple here. Hold on, I've got a lot of Post-its on here. So on page 58, there's a section on page 50, I think it's 53. There's several places in here where you've crossed out 50% and put 75%, which at first glance seems like you're planting more trees, but is there a point when you can, let me ask it another way. Is there a point where you can overplant the trees so they're never really going to be able to grow to maturity?
Scientifically speaking, yes, there is.
And what is that point?
Well, in what size parcel, Mayor?
Well, I guess it comes to how close together they are, but I'm seeing requirements for what kind of trees. So, for example, 75% of the trees shall be shade trees, and
What section is that in?
That's page 53.
So if you're talking about page 53, that is under the section for landscape requirements for all zone districts.
Okay.
Letter B, 1A, I, for other than one family residence, and then B, I, for a one family residence. As Glenn alluded to in the introduction, instead of having the section in a paragraph form, we simply listed it. Nothing there was changed. This says here, the checkout language there is there shall be one tree per each 1,000 square feet. If you look at number I, it's one tree per 1,000 square feet. It's the same language. If you look at the next sentence, the tree planting requirement is in addition to the VUA. That's the same. 20% of the trees shall be shade trees. This jumped from 20% to 75% in order to be consistent with the vehicular use area, with the buffer requirements, with the buffer requirements, and excuse me, with the zoning district numbers listed in the table under A, which is the table previous to B. So when you're looking through the code section and you're picking out the number 75, it's very important to see where that number 75 falls under, and I know you're aware of that, where that 75 falls under and how that relates to other code sections throughout the document. So if you move down on page 53 to letter B for one family residence, when I was a plans examiner in DSD, the number one question we had was that our neighbors were unable to understand what this one sentence meant. And we were constantly handing out little pieces of paper to help itemize a little checklist format. And that is exactly what we did on section B. We just simplified the language. It is not changed. Section B is the same language. It's just itemized.
Okay, on page 58, on B, on 16B, a minimum of 75% of the required street trees shall be shade trees and the remaining 25%. Was there a reason for that change?
Okay, 16B, that falls under the landscape requirements for all zoning districts. So where the districts require 16, that's where it is required to be. 16B, the minimum of 75% of the required street trees shall be shade trees, and the remaining 25% of the required street trees may be a combination of shade, flowering, fruiting, and/or large palm tree species. This again was to be consistent with the chapter 4 of the downtown, I don't know what you'd call it, chapter 4 of the thank you, downtown master plan. I've been out of it for a couple months. The downtown master plan, where you need the street trees that line the streets, and the corners get defined with palm tree specimens.
So, okay, I have a question. Are you saying that pardon me, are you saying that the provision to emphasize shade trees in the downtown is being imposed in all zoning districts?
No, ma'am. I'm trying to explain how we got to bump from 50% to 75% for shade trees. I think it's also a combination of hearing from stakeholder groups that instead of requiring 5% to be shade, 5% to be flowering, 10% to be fruiting, large palm, if you gave the design option for a 75% umbrella and left the design option up to the designer to provide shade, flowering, fruiting for street trees, and then the remainder can be the large palm tree species, it is more flexible than what it is today.
Okay, Mary? You're muted, Mary.
I'm sorry. I don't know that I really understand that. So what you're trying to be is more restrictive in what types of trees can be planted? Was that?
No, the opposite. We are trying to be more flexible by allowing that 75% to be a combination of shade, flowering, and fruiting.
Okay,
For
25 or 75?
75%. So if you have 100-foot long street, 3 of those have to be a shade tree and 1 of them can be a palm.
So that 75% should be shade trees.
Correct.
And that's less restrictive than what there is today, which is 50%.
More restrictive.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, but I'm, okay. All right, let me just go to another point. The comments, and I did see this throughout when I was reading, that it's as determined by the department. Can you explain why you would not put something specific? I mean, we know staff changes. It does not seem as definitive to me as putting a standard in there.
Yes, I think that is one of the efforts to attempt to allow for exceptions when in some circumstances, such as they have been expressed, where they have a concern about not being able to fit certain trees in a site, that the department can allow an exception. And it's something where it's difficult to really quantify or put that into specific code. I think that's in a lot of the cases, that's the purpose of that. Do you want anything to add, Ken?
Okay. And did you incorporate in here incentives? One of the speakers mentioned incentives for keeping trees. Do you have a section that puts those incentives in there?
No, ma'am. We had discussed that. We would be interested in that, but it's beyond the scope of our current effort.
It's beyond the scope of what you were charged to do, or beyond the scope of what you have done?
I have a problem with the issue of incentives. I mean, we're gonna we're gonna give somebody a break because they abided by the law? That's ridiculous.
We just did incentives and basically on historic preservation. We've done incentives on a lot of things. I'm just wondering if we've done it, but then that will take us to the next topic, which would be the trust fund. Is there any rationale really for doing anything with that money but planting trees? I mean, a third, it seems like you've got in here that you could have a greater proportion. You could have almost a third of the money going to planning as opposed to actually planting.
Are you finished?
Yeah.
Okay. The intention behind that was to help assist the city with its strategic initiatives to be able to better manage and enhance the urban forest. I think over the years, that's been an area where we have wanted to improve and move towards a place where we have a more strategic plan. It would all be in support of the urban forest, but it's not directly, it's not planting trees. Previously, the ordinance had, the tree trust fund language had an allowance for up to 20% for ancillary costs. And this is something that, although not specific to tree planting, is an ancillary cost for the maintenance and enhancement of our urban forest.
So it's funded with the equivalent value, the money you're getting from the replacement of a tree or palm.
Yes.
And then that money that is intended to replace a tree or a palm, a portion of it, a significant portion of it is then being used to come up with a plan on how to plant the tree. I'll save the rest of my comments for later, Catherine.
Okay. I am looking for other board. John? Is your hand up?
Yes, it is. Thank you. So while I appreciate Mary going through every section of the code, which I think is very fair to everybody's put all this time and effort into this, I'm afraid, and I'm going to speak in idioms because that's what I do. I'm an architect and I'm very descriptive, and sometimes I describe things differently, but we are literally missing the forest for the trees. So the main focus of this, the main objective, what commission asked staff to do was to preserve trees, to preserve old trees. And we're talking about new trees. We're talking about everything else except preserving trees. Even in the case where we're trying to create this bank to preserve trees, it's new trees, which I get because we have to replace some of the canopy we remove. I find it very ironic that we're up 20% as a city in our tree canopy, and we're talking about, you know, all of these upgrades to new installments, which is odd. I think we've really lost focus, and I think it really boils down to the code as it was written. If it were enforced properly and we policed it properly and we approved this project properly, the trees would still be there. They would have worked around the trees. And this has created this firestorm where we're gonna overcompensate, and we're gonna tie the hands of very creative landscape architects who spoke to us tonight, who are responsible for some of the most beautiful parts of our city, iconic throughout the world, these guys and girls. And I don't want to leave my sister out. And it scares me because we have other sections of the code. As an architect, I can relate to sections of the code that speak to buildings. At one point, the city rewrote our residential code to allow for more creativity. And here we are giving them these prescriptive things. You got to do this, 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 and this. And we're just going to tie the hands of designers in all of this. It's really sad to see where this is going. I don't like it. The other thing too, Catherine, and you cut Mary off on the whole incentive thing. We literally just approved a section of the code to preserve our old buildings by giving incentives to people to preserve old buildings. And here's a living, breathing organism that's been on this planet way longer than we'll ever be here. And to replace that tree, I think is super important, and to give developers incentive to replace those trees, I think is hugely important. If we gave them, you know, a bonus here, allowed them a deviation there, if they push their building back here, that's what we did in the residential code. And I think ideas like that need to be incorporated. And one thing I will warn you as an architect, and this is super important, you cannot leave decisions, especially in a creative field, especially in a very litigious field as architecture and landscape architecture, you can't leave those decisions to the city. And the city would be crazy to counter anything that would be recommended by a professional outside. The professional says, we believe that tree is a danger, cut it down. And the city says, no, in all my years, I believe that tree is good and we want you to leave it. And the tree falls and destroys somebody's property, which just opens a huge liability for the city. I think it's just got to be, the code has to be written to encourage the preservation of trees. The rest of it, if we're gonna talk about the rest of it really has to enhance the city, enhance the creativity, enhance the diversity of the canopy. And I'm afraid with what we're doing, we're just throwing everything at this thing. And we really need professionals involved in writing this code. And I would recommend that the city hire, the same way they do in other cases when we're rewriting code, hire professional consultants, put it out to bid, and let's get this thing right. And I think the city of Fort Lauderdale should be the lead on this. One of the commentators made that comment. We should be the lead in the nation as far as what to do, how to do it right. And if we're going to go over the top, that's great, but we got to balance everything. And we need to hire the people who really know how to do this stuff. And there's a lot of good folks at the city, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody there. It's just, it definitely needs work in my eyes, in my professional opinion as an architect. Thank you.
Any other comments? There's somebody from Chambers that wishes to speak.
Hi.
Yeah, Jay and I. Go ahead, Jay.
Okay. Well, it's going to be hard to top John. But I had a question for Mark Williams, our city arborist. I believe he's on the call.
Is Mark Williams here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Mark. So, Mark, do all these swale trees that we've been planting in Tarpon River come from the Tree Canopy Trust Fund?
If you're speaking in generalities, I can't answer that. But what I can say is I have been focused on putting in trees in select areas in swales that may or may not involve the area you're talking about.
But it comes from the Tree Canopy Trust Fund?
The ones I plant do, yes.
Okay. Do you feel that the amount of funds available today for that purpose are sufficient, given the amount of tree requests that you receive?
Strictly for funding, no. The funding that I'm allocated is insufficient at this point. I'm not going to go too much into details as to why, it's semantics, but there are shortfalls when it comes to urban forestry. A lot of the code revisions cover that, but speaking strictly money, yes, I do not have adequate funds to really ramp up tree installations at this point.
Okay. I guess I would just note to the board that, you know, in Tarpon River, we really do lack a tree canopy within the neighborhood, and the main means by which we've been able to increase that is through this free tree swale program. We've had, you know, some 60 some odd trees planted within the last year, just 20 last week all came. We do wait up to 5 months for funding to be available. And I would hate to see there be even less funding designated for the sole purpose of planting trees clearly the tree canopy has gone up somehow. Perhaps this is how, and I'd hate for us to slow that down by diverting some of those funds to another purpose.
Thank you, Jay. Jackie?
Yeah, I've got a number of questions. First of all, I want to thank John Baracco for actually saying exactly what I think. He said it much more succinctly as far as this ordinance goes. I am really surprised that there are not more people from neighborhoods that are participating in this process. I find that extremely peculiar when I know a few months ago there was a lot of emails and stuff going back and forth. So I don't know if they gave up and realized that what they wanted they weren't going to get. I don't understand it, but I wish they were here. I've heard a lot of really positive comments about changes that need to be made or inserted. And then I don't know. I'm going to ask staff a few questions. Can you all tell me what you think you did? 1, 2, 3, 4. Make it easy. What did you do by rewriting this that is going to eliminate tree removal in these neighborhoods? I mean, that really was the issue. All the trees, I think, over in Southwest, there's been tons of trees in Coley Hammock on residential properties. How does this new code going to slow that down? What penalties or what did you put in there that would meet what the commission wanted?
So should we hear from Glenn or Kim?
I'm happy to answer that. The section under the tree preservation, which we changed to be tree and palm regulations.
Could you speak into the mic, please? And what page are you talking about?
Yep. All right, let's go to that. That would be the bottom of page 82, top of page 83, an enforcement and penalty section for not obtaining a tree permit. This includes civil fines for violators, both with property owners and contractors. That was a brand new section that was added as a penalty, which is not there today.
Can you tell me what that penalty is?
Sure. The
I don't have on my reading glasses.
That's okay. The first offense is $1,000 per tree plus a monetary payment made into the Tree Canopy Trust Fund for the equivalent value of the tree or palm. The second offense within a 12-month period is $2,000, and then the multiplier goes up to twice the equivalent value. The third offense is $3,000 and 5 times the equivalent of the tree or palm.
Let me ask you a question. I'm gonna, I don't want to take up everybody's time. So if I want to build something, the cost of removing a tree without a permit is going to be $1,000. I mean, that's nothing.
$1,000 plus the equivalent value of the tree or palm.
And how's that determined?
Equivalent value.
Yeah.
Equivalent value is determined. We have a brand new subsection in the same code for calculating mitigation fees. And the
Just give me an idea. If I take down a 30-foot oak tree without a permit and pay $1,000, and what's the value of that, Fred? Somebody
to do it. Yeah, it's very difficult to just wing it with a number without having.
Okay. Sorry.
It's 0 if it's unhealthy, though, right?
That's the thing. Is it a specimen tree? Is it a
specimen
healthy tree?
Right. Is it a desirable tree? Is it non-specimen? There's just factors.
61%.
I'm not able to give you a number off the top of my head.
Okay, because I think a lot of times the builder or developer makes a business decision. And so if it's more cost effective to remove the tree and pay the fine, that's what they're going to do.
And you can have all of the language in the world and that
Right.
mindset, you're not going to be able to control.
But
Jackie, any more questions?
excuse me?
Jackie, any more questions?
Yeah, I have some comments if I can continue, please.
Mhm.
That goes back to providing incentives for developers, right? So they don't take down as many trees, right?
Yes, incentives were not included.
Right, so that's, okay. Let me ask you another question. In this ordinance, is there anywhere that says that you can make a tree historic? Can you designate a tree historic?
Yes.
How do you do that?
We have a desirable tree definition. And under that desirable tree definition, that is an umbrella. I'll get you to that page here in a second.
I don't really need the dimensions. I just like to understand what that process really is, how realistic it is.
A process for a desirable tree?
No, a process for designating a tree historic.
We do not have a process for designating a tree historic.
So you were just, okay.
No, we have a desire. I misunderstood your question. We have a proposed desirable tree definition.
Yeah.
That was proposed to help include under the umbrella of one title. The reason being, we get contacted very often, and the questions are: is this a champion tree? Is it a historic tree? Is it a let me go to the definition here so that I don't.
Guess I need to know what is a historic tree and how did it become historic?
Exactly. And there are county and state and other cities that have programs specifically for this. In this code ordinance or requirement, a process for that designation is not by code ordinance. If we wanted to call it historic, we could create a process and it would fall then under the definition.
I think that's one way of trying to protect some of these older trees, if you want to know the truth.
If I may, Dwayne Spence, Assistant City Attorney. No, we do not have a designation for an historic tree. We do have a designation for protected tree. If a tree is, and one of the criteria for that is if a tree has historic value, it can be presented to the City Commission for approval through the adoption of a resolution as a protected tree.
City Commission protected tree.
So
Correct.
it goes right to City Commission. Okay. I guess my opinion at this point is that I think this ordinance needs to continue to be worked on. Not that I don't respect and appreciate all the time that staff has put into it, but I think there's things lacking, and I would hate for us to move this to the City Commission. I don't know that we have the authority to move it or not move it, but I would hate to see this go to the City Commission and have all these people and experts come out and say all the things that are wrong with it or the things that we didn't include in it. And it's not like we have an opportunity next year to revisit this again. Like John said, there was specific criteria that was put forward, and I hope that we can continue to work on this and not move it forward. Could be one of our last chances in the next 10 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Coleman.
Thanks, Catherine. I wanted to go back to something Dwayne had said earlier about the certified ordinance under Broward County. And I think that we've talked about a lot of really good ideas tonight, the specimen trees, the incentives, the tree spacing, all those kind of ideas. But I get the sense that that probably takes us further away from the Broward ordinance and less likely to be certified there, which would create an additional level of permitting. So you'd have to go to the city for permitting and the county for permitting. Is that correct, Dwayne?
It depends on the aspects that you're looking to change and whether or not they comport with the Broward County Code. So just so that there's no confusion with what I'm talking about, Article 14 of the Broward County Code, specifically 27-4-404 says that this article applies to all persons within the geographic boundaries of Broward County and shall be enforceable on a countywide basis unless otherwise provided herein. And then on section 27-406 of the Broward County Code, where it speaks to certification, it says if a municipal recertification is granted, Broward County shall relinquish its authority to enforce this article within the municipal boundaries of a municipality which has a valid municipal certification and recertification as provided in Chapter 27, Article 14, Section 407. Notwithstanding the certification, Broward County specifically retains the authority to enforce provisions of this article regarding the following. And Kimberly mentioned some of these earlier. Properties owned and controlled by Broward County, properties owned and controlled by the Broward County School Board, properties designated as local areas of particular concern, and they have authority over tree abuse committed by licensed and unlicensed tree trimmers. So it really would be a case-by-case analysis of the provisions, which is one of the things when staff originally presented this for my review, and some of the stakeholder comments, I had to go back and forth with, because I'm strictly looking at compliance with the Broward County Code and the compliance with the Florida Friendly Model Ordinance provided by state statute. And so that's where I only raise my head and object. And I just have an issue when the design professionals kind of negate that without kind of explaining to me why these provisions of law, if you're specifically saying in the ordinance that it needs to comply with these two aspects, and then you present something that's contrary to those. If we want to live contrary to them, that's fine. I don't have any dog in that fight, but we can't say expressly in the ordinance that our objective is to comply with these things and not do so. I'm sorry, that was kind of long-winded.
No, but I guess, it gets to the point. I mean, I think that someone mentioned earlier the Broward County ordinance is 30 years, and I think we're looking at a much more progressive ordinance, which there's likely to be some conflicts. And my fear is that we're going to do a lot of good to preserve our tree canopy, which is a huge concern, and we should be addressing that. But can we get comfortable if we come up with an ordinance that we're not going to be creating an additional level of permitting, which is going to create additional cost and delay, and perhaps be a disincentive?
And I think that conversation needs to be had with Broward County, to be honest with you. So we can make the proposed revisions and have a conversation with the folks that would be reviewing it with Broward County to say, would this trigger, would this put us in jeopardy of not being recertified? So the questions that Mr. Stressal asked me earlier, I can't answer that question because I'm not the one that would be reviewing it for Broward County. I can only review it for the city and say, as compared with the Broward County ordinance, we don't meet this provision. So I just raised a red flag.
Okay. But so potentially that's a route that we could go if we came up with an ordinance that we were happy with before it became official. We could go to the county and get some comfort that they're going to certify us.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mary?
Catherine, thank you. I don't know where we should go with this. Here's my fear. If we don't address many of what I consider to be the deficiencies or problems with this ordinance, and it goes to the commission like it is, then we probably haven't done the right thing. But I'm going to put a motion forward based on what John said, because it kind of reflects what I think. And before I do that, I'm going to say that when we think about trees, and I think we've all been horrified when we...
Mary,
yes.
I am so sorry to interrupt, but I forgot that the director of the department, Raj Verma, is on the call and wished to speak. Before you make a motion.
Okay, then just come back to me. I'll be ready for you when you come back.
Okay, Mr. Verma, I'm so sorry. It's my fault.
No, Madam Chair, it's not your fault. It's okay. It's a very passionate subject, and I just wanted to share a few things. And I will say this, that in order to minimize the emotions surrounding this issue, I changed some key staff members, and I try to work with with the residents and various interest group with direct communication. And I will tell you that we have spent many hours on this subject, and we have also tried to include as many people as many times as that has been requested. One of the biggest challenges, and by no means, as an engineer, I'm not going to pretend that I know what type of leaf it is and what type of branches they are, but I can tell you is that we were struggling to balance the Florida-friendly state requirements, Broward County ordinance, and the needs of the community, which at many times they did not coincide. They did not come together. And that really posed a big challenge for us. And one of the things that we struggled was that trying to make any changes and trying to have Broward County be progressive, I don't, it's extremely difficult. They are quite, they are substantially set in their own ways, and try to make them understand or say, well, if we make these changes, is that going to be in compliance? So that was one of our biggest challenges that we had. I know it has been an emotional subject for many years, and I know that the staff has not given too many straight answers, or were not able to give the straight answers because of the scope and the issues that were requested to be included. But I am going to recognize many hours of the staff that went into this exercise, and especially I had some lot of conversations with Dwayne Spence, and I want to recognize his contribution, and the staff. It may not be very complete, but to me, listening to all these comments after the, I'm not going to say it's frustration, but I take this as an incentive, in the sense that I've learned a lot. There are lots of issues that have been raised, and some of them, they are good issues, and we will be more than happy to take a look at as many as we can accommodate. The only thing that I'm going to request this board is that as we navigate through these issues and the concerns that are raised, at some point in time, we have to accept that it is not going to be a perfect ordinance that is going to make everybody happy. There are certain elements that are going to stay there in terms of how should I say it? Because we are trying to avoid the duplication of the enforcement action by the county and the city. So struggling through all those requirements has been a big challenge, because of which we are not able to answer all the questions. But I will tell you that it has been a learning experience, listening to many of the folks, that have been presenting their comments, and we have taken the note of it, and we will be more than happy to go back to the drawing board and try and address as many questions as we can, making sure that we do not create an additional layer of enforcement by the county. So Ms. Pertig, if you want to proceed with your motion, and again, I'll probably be repeating myself, but it has been a learning experience, and there are some good comments, and we'll be more than happy to respond to those comments. But at some point in time, we would have to realize that we will not be able to make a perfect ordinance that is going to meet the needs. And before I end my statement, I'm going to respond to just a couple of questions about the landscape architect on the staff. As the director, I will tell you that I did not believe that the landscape architect who was on staff, he was essentially a project manager, and we try to use him, and it is my responsibility as the department director to see if we are getting the worth of a position. But just because we do not have somebody on staff, I have expanded our list of consultants that give us the wide variety of people who are going to be used in the city for various services. And landscape architecture is one of the disciplines that is going to give us more flexibility to choose based on our need. And I'll tell you, I'm an engineer, but if somebody asks me to go and design a skyscraper, I can probably go beyond 3 or 4 stories. But if I have to go to the skyscrapers, I'll have to go back to school. So just because you have an architect doesn't mean that they have the expertise. But we are trying the best we can. And again, we'll be happy to entertain any questions, recognizing that it has been an emotional subject, but we do need to come to some conclusion, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Mary, do you have questions for Mr. Verma?
Well, I just have a statement and then I'm going to follow that with a motion.
Well,
Mary,
wait.
before you make the motion, there's a couple of us here in chamber that would like to weigh in as well, please.
Yes,
Okay,
there are-
thank you,
Mary,
Mike.
there are
Okay.
hands up, okay?
I will make my motion and my just comment, and then do you want me to make the motion first, Catherine?
No, I want to finish.
Okay, so my comment is this. I think, and I've heard this from many different people tonight, there are many sections of our community that we love to drive through because of the tree canopy. And that is there today because of what people did yesterday. And I think as we look forward to the next 30 years or whenever before this gets redone again, we want to make sure there's a tree canopy then. So what worked and is this ordinance going to perpetuate the tree canopy and grow the tree canopy we have or not? I feel like the number of amendments that would be required to this would keep us here all night. And so my motion, and I'm just going to tell you what it is, and then I'll make it when you tell me to, is to recommend to the city commission that the city hire a qualified landscape architect consultant to work with a joint staff and community task force to revise the landscape tree preservation ordinance. And I will just say that I feel like one element, we asked this in November of 2019, which was a year and a half ago. I know commissioners commented on it, and then there was no real addition of outside of community people. And I think we heard from a lot of community people tonight who would have liked to have been on that committee to help write the ordinance. So that's my motion. And if I get a second, we can talk about it.
Hopefully we can talk about it before a second comes up.
Oh, okay. That's fine. That's fine.
So.
Okay. Mike.
You go first.
Yeah.
So yes. I agree with Jackie that Mr. Barranco laid it out there pretty well. I think there's been an exorbitant amount of time expended by everyone. And I will tell you that where I don't agree with John is, and I guess with Mary's motion, is to now go out and find a group to analyze this. We've got, and I don't mean to call you guys specimens, but you know, when you start talking about age and size, you guys are specimens. We've got landscape architects and people with tremendous credentials that have exerted countless free hours to come up with this. And from what I'm gathering, for the most part, with the exception of a couple of these points, is that this is mostly into definitions. So my comment to Mary, because I'm not going to second it or try to amend it, is I think if we could get this, I don't want to call them a blue ribbon panel, but this group of architects and arborists to work with the city, I think a lot of this can get addressed. That's it.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else in chambers?
Jay?
I agree with Mike. This is Jay.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Anybody else in chambers?
I don't want I don't want to delay this too long. I agree with Mike's comment as it relates to bringing in some of the experts that we have here that are willing to put their time in. We've heard all the comments tonight and the recommendations. Let's let all of them meet, as Mike said, and then bring it back to us, or however you want the process to go. I don't know that I want to go totally what Mary said, because it sounds like that would be too much of a delay, but I'm as passionate about this probably as anybody here.
Well, if they can get consensus on 90% of the things that we've been talking tonight, that may bring it back to us to handle applying percentages or what have you.
Yeah, and I mean, so many of these things are so, they seem small, but they're so important.
Okay, I have other hands up. Anybody else from chambers wishing to speak on this item? John? John Bronco?
Yes, thank you. Again, going back to my idiom thing. So there was this little book that one of my clients had me read years ago. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's about two little mice running around a maze. I don't know if anybody's ever read that book, but I feel like a lot of cheese has been put into this, but I'm afraid the cheese we got is not the cheese we need. This is not the best cheese. And I'm afraid that if we push this thing along without really giving it its due attention and having people look at this thing from the perspective of the folks who have to follow the code. This code is being written primarily for landscape architects. That's who it's written for. I'm not going to read that code. I might read part of it, but truth be told, the landscape architects are going to have to present drawings to the city that abide by this code. And looking at the calendar of dates where everybody was consulted, the landscape architects weren't consulted till the third year this was discussed. So we've got 3 years of cheese being built, but I don't believe it's good for the city. And as much as listen, trust me, I know a lot of effort's gone into this, Mike, but it just has to be refined. It has to be done right. And I personally would not push this forward. Being who I am, I wouldn't want my name associated with something that hasn't been thought through.
Thank you very much. Mary?
So one of the reasons I agree that, and I think I said this, many of the speakers tonight are the people that we would want on a committee. But it's not that they haven't met or discussed with staff. It's my understanding that they have. They've certainly sent out letters. Those letters, parts of what they've recommended either have or have not been accepted. I really feel that if this had started out with them sitting at the table with staff, as opposed to having a meeting and being on this list of community meetings, which by the way, a great many of them are internal meetings. If they had been on that committee, I think what we'd see before us tonight is very different. And I mean, if it was up to me, I would have a whole community committee with staff working with them. And I just don't, I'm with John. I don't want to pass. I either want to sit here and make these amendment after amendment after amendment, as I think many of us have seen outlined, or I want to get the community at the table so that what comes forward is something that is endorsed by the people who live in the city of Fort Lauderdale. That is no disrespect to anybody who's worked on it. I know you've worked hard, but I also think that many of the things that are important to us as residents are not in here the way we want to see them in here. So.
Okay, there's another hand up in chambers.
Yes. I just want to clarify, this is Jay. We're talking about a potential for making amendments, but is this not, would they not just be recommendations to the commission? Can somebody clarify that?
Yes, Jay, they would be recommendations.
Okay.
Sorry, Dwayne.
Not a problem. Assistant City Attorney Dwayne Spence. That is correct. You're functioning as both the Planning and Zoning Board and the local planning agency. So in both functions, you'll be making recommendations to the City Commission, and the local planning agency. You're reviewing the ordinance for its consistency with the comprehensive plan. And as the Planning and Zoning Board, you're just doing what you're doing now, which is reviewing and going to make a recommendation whether to suggest whether or not they approve or deny the ordinance as written.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I think that being the case, I would hate to, create such a headache for the commissioners. That maybe we can work through all this here before we move it on to them.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Anybody else in chambers wishing to speak on this item?
Bill Rotella.
Hi, Bill.
it seems to me we've got staff here and we've got the landscape architects, both of those that are here in chambers and those that have spoken. Those two groups need to get together. We're debating back and forth a whole lot of issues. When the two people or the two groups that really need to get together that have, that have the answers, or at least their combined expertise needs to get put into this document. So it seems we're going back and forth. We've heard a lot of comments every which way, but it seemed to me that this should get deferred, that they should meet and try to get this softened into something that's acceptable to P&Z, or comes back with a lot less comments and something that we can massage before we send it to commission.
Thank you, Bill.
Can I add to that?
So, Director Verma, do you wish for a brief rebuttal?
No, actually there is no rebuttal, as I said before, and a couple of times that, it has
2 minutes, please, 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I think as a compromise, if I may suggest that if different board members and people, they have got a list of questions, concerns, we can go back and whoever the board designates that we need to coordinate with, we can sit down, we can go through each of those issues line by line, and we can respond back to them with a question that these are the concerns by so-and-so, this is the response, such that you will have specific answers to the questions that have been asked. So this would be my suggestion, that let the staff and a group, whoever wants to participate, they can sit down, go through those questions, and we can produce a sort of a table whereby these are the questions, these are the answers, why this can be done, whether this has been incorporated or not. So
yes, and Director Verma, could that happen between tonight and the city commission hearing on this item?
it will. I think it will all depend, Chair, how many issues are out there, and
Sure,
we
but
can definitely.
the city commission hearing doesn't have to be in May. It can be a little bit further out.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
there would be time to go through all these items, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely make it happen, as long as we have got some very clear directions from this board and the questions, the issues, and then whoever they wanted to nominate in that in that group that we can coordinate with, and we can definitely work.
Thank you very much, Director Verma. There's a hand up in chambers. Is anybody in the chambers wishing to speak on this item yet?
Yes, I want to make a comment. Obviously, I think that staff needs to be in touch with all the landscape architects and architects that are here tonight, others that aren't in Jeremy, et cetera, that group needs to meet. I think that with staff, and I also think that the meeting or the discussions needs to include any of the neighborhood type people that also want to participate and make comments.
Jackie, where are they?
Well, Catherine, I think they did as much as they could do, is my guess, because they're as passionate as I am.
And this isn't on a regular meeting night. They may not know.
So here's the point. So we need to let them have 1 or 2 meetings, let them sort it out, and then bring it back to us in a fashion that we can all support it, make any changes we need to. And I don't want this to take 6 months. I want to get it done as quick as possible so staff can move on to other things that they need to be doing. But I just think it'll be much more positive if we do that. My main point is to make sure anybody that wants to be included can be included, but the experts need to be at the table with staff.
Thank you, Jackie. Mary?
Okay, I'm going to withdraw my motion and just move to defer, I guess, but here's my concern. My concern is that the group that has written to us and some of the speakers that have spoken tonight have tried to have that voice, and it hasn't happened, but I'm going to move to defer until there can be a conversation between the community and the staff. And I don't know when that is.
Is there a second to Mary's motion?
Second that, John Bronco.
Okay, discussion, I'll speak. I am opposed to the motion. I think that we should all recollect the words of Doug Coolman, who said that 2 previous efforts to revise this ordinance were abandoned. And I mean, how many years did that encompass? And here we have something that will do some good. And between now and whenever the commission meeting is on this item, which does not have to be May, all the things that you all want to happen can happen. You can have the stakeholder groups, whoever wanted to be here but isn't, they can attend, the professionals, the meetings with staff, it can all happen. I have been on this board for a long time, and I know that the pipeline for the revision of a city ordinance is very, very long. And I am very unhappy if we would send this off back into the abyss for who knows how long.
And I'm equally unhappy if we move forward something that we don't think is right to the city commission and make them step by step by step go through it. But I mean, we can just start amending it. I mean, at what point we have received, I'm sure all of us, many communications with pointing out things that need to be changed in this ordinance. And I feel like we need to give the commission a recommendation one way or the other, or give the staff another opportunity to meet with these people and see what they can agree on before it comes back to us. For example, I'm not comfortable with the tree trust fund. I'm not comfortable with many of the definitions. The 75% of street trees being shade trees is something that I would want to hear further conversation on. I'm picking out 3 things. There are many more. I just don't see that we have time to resolve. I don't see that those things are going to be resolved until there is more conversation between the speakers tonight and the staff, with a clear understanding that, at least in my case, many of the things they pointed out were things that need to be resolved before the commission adopts this.
Thank you,
Catherine,
Mary. There's somebody from the chambers wish to speak?
Bill Rotella. It certainly sounds, and not putting words in his mouth, that Raj is willing to go back and meet with the landscape architect. So I'm not sure why we're going round and round. There seems to be a level of cooperation from what he's willing to do. He said he was willing to go through this document line by line and try to get something that's clear and works for everybody. So I don't know how to go about making a motion to do that, but it certainly sounds he is willing to do it. I certainly know that's what the landscape architects have indicated that they want to do. So I don't know how we put that into a motion to recommend that that's what happens.
No, right now we have a motion on the table. We have a motion to defer. So if that motion fails, another motion can be made.
A motion to defer pending that conversation between the staff.
Defer it is for them to have that conversation.
And obviously, we don't want this to go on for 3 months. We just want to have everybody get together and come to consensus on the things that can be changed. I mean, not everything is going to be able to be changed, but I think there's enough positive comments and cooperation on both sides, as Bill said, that we need to let them all get together. And
can we establish a time frame, that it needs to be in the next 30 to 60 days?
Bill, we have a motion on the table to defer.
A motion to defer pending a conversation, but I'll make it defer until the May meeting. That's what, 6 weeks away? No. Yeah, 6 weeks away.
For it to be a motion to have a conversation, can you be more specific?
Okay.
Will it be wine?
You're saying you want to be more specific about the conversation?
No, I will tell you that I got very educated on this whole item over the last 2 weeks. And I'm sure that the outreach will continue going forward. If I hear in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whenever we come back, that there hasn't been a bona fide attempt to try to find a middle ground or break bread, then, we defer it again or what have you. But I think, it's incumbent on the city and the community to get together and bring something that is 95% complete, and not talking about the tree fund.
Okay, we're discussing the motion to defer.
Right, I know.
Okay.
The
Mary?
My motion to defer was more than let's defer it. It was to defer it pending the conversation between, if you want me to be specific, I don't want to just say landscape architects because I believe there are others, as Jackie pointed out, in the community who would want to be part of that, but specifically the landscape context, architects and others in the community, and that we defer it until the May meeting, which is 6 weeks away. I think it's unrealistic to set a shorter time frame or to start another special meeting.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Verma, your hand is up. You may only speak to this motion.
No, it's too late, Chair, so I'll withdraw my hand.
Mr. Verma, you have a minute. Tell me what you were going to say.
Well, I was going to say if, as long as it is not time specific, I mean, I would like to do it in June, if not in May, if possible, because we'll have to piece everything together and just a couple of, points.
Mr. Verma, let me shortcut you right there. Mary, are you agreeable to June?
June is wonderful.
And the second, are you agreeable to June?
I am, yes.
Terrific. Okay, the motion is now to defer to June. Did that take care of your concerns, Mr. Verma?
Yes, Madam Chair, it did.
Okay. All right. I repeat what I said. I still stand by it. Bridget, I think we're ready for a vote.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Pruitt,
Yes.
Mr. Rotella,
Yes.
Mr. Bronco.
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Weymouth,
Yes.
Mr. Schechtman,
Yes.
Ms. Scott,
Yes.
Ms. Fertig,
Yes.
and Chair Moss.
No.
Okay.
Motion carries.
Mhm.
Thank you all to the people in the audience at City Chambers. You really did a yeoman's effort on this, and I can't thank you enough on behalf of the board. Thank you to Director Verma and staff. Again, I know you've worked long and hard on this, and we really appreciate it. Board
Thank you.
members, good job.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
good night.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you all very much.